This is Jeff Eisenband, and this is Eyes on Golf. When I started this podcast earlier this week, I did not expect the second episode to be an emergency podcast on a Friday that I'm trying to get up just before the weekend. That is of, I guess you could say, the utmost importance. We'll get right into it. Jon Rahm signs with LIV Golf, numbers undisclosed. I want to start here by explaining, if you're coming onto this podcast, first of all, I guess a couple prologue notes for you. I'm an independent contractor to the PGA Tour. I broadcast for PGA Tour Live. I've contributed to other PGA Tour channels as well. If you don't want to listen to me because of that, I can't fault you for it. But I am going to come with both an objective viewpoint here and also toward the second half of this subjective viewpoint, explaining why I do what I do in golf and what I would like to see from the golf space. I've been very, very objective, middle ground, and I still am. I've tried to keep I've tried to be as non-controversial as possible, and I'll try to continue doing that. But I do have some thoughts on this podcast that I want to share, and I do have some thoughts that I want to share specifically on this episode. But the beginning of this podcast, especially for those who might not know exactly what's going on, I do want to explain. Jon Rahm goes to LIV Golf. We're talking about a player who has perennially been in the top 3 in the world, top 5 in the world over the last few years. 11 PGA Tour wins. 4 last year. That was more than any other player to major titles in his career, including the Masters 1 season ago. 10 wins on the DP World Tour. That includes 2 overlapping with the PGA Tour. He has spent 52 weeks at world number 1. That is 9th all time. It appears, and we'll get into why things appear a certain way, it appears we're not going to see Jon Rahm at world number 1 for a while now because of this LIV Golf signing, which the numbers, what are they? What are they roughly? Well, we're hearing ESPN report more than $300 million. We've heard as much as $600 million with the rumors. The Telegraph's James Corrigan says 450 million pounds, which comes to $565 million allegedly over 3 years. That's what we are hearing. That seems to be the number. How that is all written out, Jon Rahm, in his interview on Fox News today, now it's Friday, talking to Pat McAfee on ESPN, he's been pretty clear he's not exactly going to say how much he is getting paid. So it doesn't appear that we will know those figures. I want to break down some of the numbers as they compare to his career as a PGA Tour golfer, a basic PGA Tour golfer. Not basic, because Jon Rahm is not that. He was second in PGA Tour money last year to Scottie Scheffler. They recorded the 2 highest earning PGA Tour seasons of all time. A big part of that because of the signature events being introduced, because of Jon Rahm winning the Masters, his performance at big events. Jon Rahm made $16,522,608 in $16,522,608. Okay, now my first grade teachers will be happy. That was last year. That was the second most ever in terms of money on the PGA Tour. Tiger Woods never made more than $11 million in a PGA Tour season. Jon Rahm also earned $670,000 from the FedEx Cup. He actually dropped off in those FedEx Cup playoffs. He also earned, converting to dollars, $848,573. That was 788,846 euros on the DP World Tour. I had to do some translating both pounds and euros before this podcast. That was this year. That comes for Jon Rahm this year, $18,041,181 before sponsorships. You think maybe he made $10 million in sponsorships this year. That would come to about $28 million made for Jon Rahm in 2023 before some other maybe speaker fees. Who knows? Basically, it's a lot of money, but it's not as much as he's allegedly going to make on this new contract for what it's worth. The PGA Tour total purse in 2023, in the 2022 to 2023 season, was $460 million. Jon Rahm's contract again, over probably 3 years with LIV Golf would be more than that. Now, why is this all surprising? Because we see people, and people are in my mentions. Of course, I have one tweet on Thursday night that went around, and I'm getting, well, you would have taken the money. Why wouldn't he have taken the money? All of that. And you are entitled for your opinion. You're entitled to say all of that. I guess the reason that maybe he wouldn't have taken the money is if you look at some of the things that, not just what he has said, let's look at LIV Golf, which hasn't signed before yesterday, hadn't signed a new player since the beginning of the season. That's when they brought in Thomas Peters, Brendan Steele, and Danny Lee, if I am correct. So it wasn't exactly like they were bringing in barnstormers, if I'm using that term correctly, at the start of the season. Part of the reason why there had not been any players is after the PGA Tour and the PIF, the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, not LIV Golf, that's where this all becomes important, signed the framework agreement for a merger on June 6th of this year. They went on CNBC, talked about everything. One of the clauses in that framework agreement was no poaching, not to poach the other tour. No, neither tour would poach the other tour's players. That was taken away in July. That was taken out basically at the request of the Department of Justice, that said that was an anti-competitive behavior. For this to all work, that clause could not be in there. So that was taken out. Still no poaching over the last 5 months or so, a little less than 5 months since that middle of July change. To Jon Rahm we go. I want to read some quotes. Maybe you've heard them. If you're coming onto this podcast and you're trying to digest everything, it's important, because Brett Baer was trying to play one on Fox News, and it actually got, Jon Rahm spoke over it, so they just took it out during that initial announcement. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Jon Rahm, the announcement was made, Jon Rahm wearing a Letterman jacket on Fox News, being interviewed by Brett Baer, was when this news all went public, just after 6 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday night. So Jon Rahm, I want to go over a lot of what was said. Let's start February of 2022. This was before LIV Golf had actually started, but this was a lot of the rumors were going around. He said, "This is my one and only time I'll talk about this, where I'm officially declaring my fealty to the PGA Tour." Narrator, we'll get to we'll get to that, how strict that is. He said, "I'm a PAC member, and I have a lot of belief in Commissioner Jay Monahan and the product that they're going to give us in the future. There's been a lot of talk of speculation about the Saudi League. It's just not something I believe is the best for me and my future in golf. And I think the best legacy I can accomplish will be with the PGA Tour." Okay, that was February 2022. 2022 U.S. Open. He's the defending champion here in June of last year. He says, "I consider the PGA Tour has done an amazing job giving us the best platform for us to perform. I do see the appeal that other people see toward LIV Golf. To be honest, part of the format is not really appealing to me. Shotgun 3 days to me is not a golf tournament, no cut. It's that simple. I want to play against the best in the world in a format that's been going on for hundreds of years. That's what I want to see." Of course, that differs from what Jon Rahm said on Thursday night, when he said that he was attracted to the innovation and the format of LIV Golf. He also said at that U.S. Open, "Yeah, money is great, but when Kelly," that's his wife, "Kelly and I, this first thing happened, we started talking about it, and we're like, will our lifestyle change if I got $400 million? No, it will not change one bit. Truth be told, I could retire now with what I've made and live a very happy life and not play golf again. So I've never really played the game of golf for monetary reasons. I play for the love of the game, and I want to play against the best in the world. I've always been interested in history and legacy, and right now, the PGA Tour has that. There's meaning when you win the Memorial Championship. There's meaning when you win Arnold Palmer's Memorial Tournament. Sorry, Jack. There's meaning when you win Arnold Palmer's event at Bay Hill. There's meaning when you win LA, Torrey, some of the historic venues. That, to me, matters a lot, right?" That was in June of last year, 2022. There's been some other things that Jon Rahm has said in the last year, for the most part expressing his fealty to the PGA Tour and his support for the PGA Tour. He's mentioned some of the older players taking their money on LIV, and he's okay with that, but that wasn't for him. Obviously, a connection to both Phil Mickelson and Sergio Garcia. Phil Mickelson, basically Jon Rahm's mentor. He went to Arizona State, played for Phil's brother, Tim, who's Phil's caddy. Tim Mickelson was the head coach when Jon Rahm got to Arizona State. So he's got that connection to the Mickelson family. Sergio Garcia, the Spanish connection that they have. Sergio, another mentor to Jon Rahm and a close friend of his. But to this point, Jon Rahm had also mentioned that Phil Mickelson had said, don't go at one point. So a lot to digest there. In terms of why all this happened, things can change. We understand that. I'm not going to sit here and say Jon Rahm is a liar. I think there's some hypocrisy. I think we all think that you know, it's tough to say all those things that I've mentioned and then go on TV and speak, reading talking points that negate basically everything that you've been saying for the last couple of years. I'm upset by it because I think Jon Rahm has been such a charismatic personality in golf, in the golf world. He's been such an open person. He is a fan of the game. There's a lot of golfers that come on and say, well, I don't watch golf when I'm not playing. Jon Rahm has said he watches when he's not playing. He studies. He knows the history. He knows everything that goes on in the sport. He knows what he's accomplished, how his legacy ties in to everything going on in the sport, which makes it so hard to fathom why he is going to deter from everything that he has spoken about in the past. On top of that, in terms of the money, he already has a ton of money. I brought it up. He's already making roughly $25 to $30 million a year. I thought it was interesting. Brandel was on Golf Channel and mentioned, you know, I know people will have their opinions on what Brandel talks about in this, you know, in what is going on in golf right now. But he said, could Jon Rahm have been selling himself short? Tiger Woods is a billionaire. Rory McIlroy is probably on his path to becoming a billionaire. Could Jon Rahm, taking $565 million, actually be selling himself short? You can't fault him for hedging there and taking that money. That's obviously still overvaluing perhaps his on-course abilities, anyone's on-course abilities. Tiger Woods wouldn't have demanded that with his on-course abilities in his peak, but that is what Jon Rahm has signed on for. So his tone, it's changed since June 6th. Maybe that's where people have been saying, couldn't you see some of the tea leaves? I say June 6th because we've talked about, a lot of people in the golf world have talked about, there are reasons that some players saw a change in their opinion, that they had maybe stood to not take money from LIV Golf, not from the PIF, and then the merger, changing their minds. There's also people that will tell you that this was an inevitable conclusion. There are people that will tell you, look at Formula One, look at what had already gone on with the DP World Tour, which is a big part of this as well. Jon Rahm has been an active member of the DP World Tour. He's been active in playing events in Spain with the DP World Tour over the last few years, obviously active with the Ryder Cup. Soccer, it looks like the World Cup is going to Saudi Arabia. So there's been a lot of, there are reasons that you can go to with why a merger or something along those lines, or a partnership, was to be inevitable. But Jon Rahm, the question that you have to ask here is, well, what is in this for him? Does he really care about playing the format of LIV Golf? It doesn't seem so. It seems like he is an ultra competitive person that doesn't fit that, like he said, shotgun start 3-day tournament, doesn't fit with the hundreds of years of history that he talked about within the game. I think that there was something interesting that Todd Lewis said on Golf Channel, a great reporter for Golf Channel, said right before the Jon Rahm announcement, when the rumors were becoming more true. He said there are others who think that Rahm feels that this will force a deal between the PIF and the PGA Tour. I am definitely not justifying Jon Rahm's reasoning here, but what I am saying is that before we all run to the hills, there seems to be something here that, if you're reading between the lines, that it doesn't necessarily mean that Jon Rahm is about to play a full season or multiple seasons just on LIV Golf and not be a part of big time events outside of majors with top players in the world. There is perhaps him feeling, I think it's a hedge, and we'll get to that. I think it's a little bit of a hedge to assume that things will go the way that you hope they will go. But there seems to be this feeling of Jon Rahm taking this money, this opportunity, not thinking that he's going to, that golf will be divided for a long period of time, and that he can maybe get a signing bonus. Who knows where that 565 million is spread out, and then he preserves his legacy because everything works out. Like I said, that is a hedge. December 31st, that is the deadline. I think that's where the next thing we get into is the timing. December 31st is the deadline for the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia and the PGA Tour to come to some sort of agreement on this framework merger that they agreed to on June 6th. So a lot of people are asking, wait a second, didn't these two companies already merge? They agreed to a framework agreement that they have not reached the actual figures, and they have not been approved by the Department of Justice. All important things to get this passed. The PGA Tour, as it has stood, my employer for, I will tell you, the majority of what I do in this world. I'm an independent contractor. Again, if you've made it this far and you don't want to listen to what I have to say, you don't have to be here. But they have been a nonprofit in the United States before this. And now part of this deal would be to create a company, PGA Tour Enterprises or whatever it would be called, that would be the for-profit company at the top of all of these properties: PGA Tour, Korn Ferry Tour, PGA Tour Americas, which is now PGA Tour Canada, and PGA Tour Latino America, other properties as well. December 31st is the current deadline. So if you're wondering, one thing I was wondering at first is, why would Jon Rahm announce this now and not wait until after the Century Tournament of Champions, after he defends his title at the American Express? He can play Torrey Pines. He can play up until that first event, which I believe is in February for LIV Golf in Mayakoba. But this was all important for LIV Golf above Jon Rahm, and maybe that's where they were incentivized to pay him what they paid him to get this done before December 31st as these negotiations continue on. There has been so much negotiating out in the open that I think there's a lot of just taking what you read on the internet and taking what you hear people say for their word, but there's so much more that is going in to these negotiations that you don't see. And these two sides continue to work toward a deal. Now, when we've been waiting for this Yasser Al-Rumayyan and Jay Monahan meeting that's allegedly was going to happen this week, maybe next week, now this is on the table when they talk about everything. We know a couple more points I just had here. We know that the PGA Tour has had conversations with private equity. We know that the Department of Justice is going to be rigid in a lot of what they will allow in this partnership. So we know this is not as clean cut as people would like it to be in terms of coming to an agreement. But December 31st could be extended. December 31st is the deadline. Will the Jon Rahm deal expedite things? We'll get to that in a second. I want to touch in. I've been going 18 roughly 18 minutes right now. So I appreciate you staying with me. But I want to say my first thought when all of this happened was as a fan. And the biggest thing that I keep going back to is LIV golfers, they are certainly making more money. PGA Tour players in the last year and change have made more money, right? You think about the reactions. I didn't even mention off the top Jon Rahm's PIF money as well that you could add in there if he is able to accept it based on the guidelines. You're talking about the extra money, the PIP money, excuse me, not the PIF money, the PIP money that players are making, the signature events, the FedEx Cup incentives, the Comcast business top 10, all of these extra incentives. Everyone is making more money. The only person in this equation, or the main people that are not making anything more, are the fans. What the fans have gotten is a divided golf world. I have the pleasure of working in this sport. I have the ability to work for PGA Tour Entertainment, go in with a microphone and just talk about live golf. It's the best job in the world, talking about the PGA Tour. But why I do this and why I'm interested and why I love what I do is because I'm a fan first. And as a fan, I look at this divided space and it's only frustrating. And it's hard to, everyone wants to point the fingers and blame everyone. And I don't know, you can look at the players, you can say, look, the players are being too greedy. in terms of everything that they're trying to get here. They're just trying to get the most amount of money at the expense of the fan. You could talk about the agents and everything that they're negotiating, the tours and the leadership. They're trying to all three tours we're talking about here, trying to hold their lines. You could talk about the media. Blame us for playing all of this up and making this sensationalizing all of this to the point that it legitimizes a lot of the divide. But at some point, it's got to come together because we're creating a situation here. I feel like golf is towing the line right now to pushing fans out. My brother Corey, we were on the phone the other day talking about at the end of 2021, right? It felt like golf was at its peak spot. So many more people were playing the sport. The sport was gaining fans from a professional standpoint in terms of people watching. Sports betting had made golf even more of an attractive sport to watch during the week. The biggest names were really getting their persona, their celebrity out there. Tiger Woods, I know, was trying to come back. I guess would have been 2021. Was trying to or that was the year he did not play, which was actually giving some of these other players a little bit of momentum. And Tiger was able to come back in 2022 before, right on the verge of LIV Golf starting. He went to the Masters in 2022. All of this was going on, and the sport was at its peak, and then LIV Golf and the divide has come along and created this situation where now fans are feeling apathetic and fans aren't sure how much they want to continue watching this sport. I hate to say it. I want you to watch what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing. And it just feels like fans are saying, well, what do I watch? How do I watch? Things are watered down. Why should I care about things other than the majors? And that is not good for the sport of golf. And that is something that I hope the people at the top, because I have no real say in this other than what I'm saying to you right now on a microphone. I hope that a lot of people within the sport who do have power recognize that the short-term gains for certain individuals right now are hurting the long-term gains for the sport and hurting the fans as a whole. Right now, long-term, whatever it may be, and that this needs to be fixed, remedied, cleared up before this thing gets too out of hand. A couple things just in terms of the players and the responsibility. This is something that has always jumped out to me. 1998, the awards dinner. Tiger Woods is getting awarded for being Tiger Woods in 1998, still very young at the time. Arnold Palmer says, this is what he says to the players. He says, you guys who are playing for so much money. What did he know in 1998, right? Remember, you have an obligation to protect the integrity and traditions of the game of golf. Palmer put his hands on Woods' shoulders and said, it's all right here. The responsibility is on your shoulders. Woods nodded in agreement. Protect it, Palmer said about golf. It's beautiful. The 30 pros in the audience responded with a long, emotional standing ovation. That was in the Tampa Bay Times in 1998. I think it doesn't just apply to golf. I think it applies to any sport because right now it's golf, but who knows what is going to come to other sports. I think a lot of people outside of golf have their opinions on everything going on. I think if you are a golf fan, you have an affinity for the PGA Tour, an affinity for the pro game of golf as it has stood for so many years. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be tinkered, but I think like Jon Rahm had said, a lot of these events, the Memorial Tournament, the Arnold Palmer Invitational, the Genesis Invitational, the Farmers Insurance Open, some of these iconic venues, Torrey Pines, Pebble Beach, we mentioned Bay Hill in that Muirfield Village in that regard, TPC Sawgrass, places that hold so much history in golf. That's important to see how things stack up. I think that's a reason why LIV Golf is going to have trouble garnering views as opposed to PGA Tour events where even if you don't know the players as well, you can tune in, you know the holes, you know the history of the venue, you know what has gone in, you know the past winners, you know what has gone into a lot of these events that make them so important. For me as a fan, I always, try to explain to people that this is the sport that I love. This is what I love to watch. This is what I love to do in terms of broadcast golf. I want to pull up here. I got a great tweet. I asked, why do you watch professional golf, to the fans out there? And I got an answer. Let me Jared Hitchcock was the name on Twitter. Jared Hitchcock said, because when it works, it's the best theater on TV. That was his answer for why do you watch professional golf. And that rang so true with me when I think about tuning in on a Sunday and that feeling of that rush of watching a close PGA Tour event. I talked about this a few weeks ago, or I guess 2 weeks ago during the Hero World Challenge, right before that, when I worked at an editorial job before, when Tiger Woods was making one of his comebacks, 2017 Hero World Challenge, I'm watching PGA Tour Live. I'm yelling at my computer as Tiger Woods is making his comeback, making birdies, cheering, showing emotion. And a colleague said to me, I've never seen anyone watch golf like this before. I said, I guess you haven't watched a lot of golf around me. And I guess you haven't watched a lot of golf around some of the biggest rabid fans around the sport who feel that emotion when they are watching and who don't want to lose that fandom and that emotion to a divide in the sport. So that's a little bit where we're at. Another thing I want to read, Mackenzie Hughes, world number 66, multi-time PGA Tour winner, really great level-headed player, had a Twitter thread, just some notes from it. He said, when I was younger, I dreamed of playing on the PGA Tour. I wanted to play against the best. When I got there, I couldn't believe how amazing it was. We've had some issues in the past couple of years, but it's still an incredible place to, in quotes, work. Unfortunately, money has changed things. Charity used to be a huge priority on tour, but it's taken a back seat. LIV has overvalued the worth of golfers so much that it has ruined our perspective and pushed purses to unsustainable levels. The marketplace seems broken. That is I would say self-aware. He also went on to say fans want to see the best compete against each other. Instead, we are watching the top players split into separate camps. It is frustrating to watch. I'm also a huge sports fan, and I would hate for my favorite players to get plucked away one by one. We need to find a way to resonate with all of you and lead the PGA Tour back to higher ground. Hopefully, our leadership can make that happen. The uncertainty has been really difficult for us, but I remain hopeful. I think that's basically spot on what he said there. I think that it's self-aware in a way that a lot of players on both sides, there's a lot of players in the PGA Tour right now at the bottom that feel that they are getting shortchanged, that they deserve to be paid more, and that it's going to be harder for them to make more money. Then you've got players at the top of the sport, whether they be within LIV Golf or certain players on the PGA Tour side may be trying to stretch certain boundaries. There's that feeling of, trying to get as much as you can, which is pure capitalism, and it's fine, but to a point where you don't want to hurt the sport. Jon Rahm I was on Pat McAfee today, and I like Pat McAfee. I like Jon Rahm. I really do, at both of them as people in the sports world. But when they were talking about money, and you see it a lot on social media, celebrating how much Jon Rahm is going to make. And I don't want to, it's not that we don't want to celebrate people making what they deserve, but the fact of the matter is Jon Rahm will be the first person to tell you he is not making, whether he says it's in public, he's not making what his market value is. And if someone is making grossly more than their market value is, that means that is at the expense of other people. That means maybe other golfers are not making what they really should be making, what their market value is, because this money has been shifted over to Jon Rahm. Maybe it means that someone in the sport of golf, there's a position out there that's going to have to be dropped, or someone's going to lose their job, or someone is not going to get the raise that they should because money is matter. Money in the sport is being shifted to Jon Rahm. That could mean money that the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia would distribute somewhere else isn't going to go there because Jon Rahm is making that amount of money. So it's not about not celebrating him. It's about the fact that other people, this is at the expense of other things. When Jon Rahm talks about growing the sport, growing the game, but then also is taking so much money that could be distributed throughout the sport, throughout the game, throughout people that could use parts of those tens of hundreds of millions of extra dollars that he's getting. It's hard to listen to the growing the game argument. Question that I got, I asked on Twitter for some questions here for sort of what do you all think? Ethan Fedoruk, I want to shout out the Bunk to Bunk podcast guys, Bunker to Bunker. Does this constant battle between LIV and the PGA Tour make professional golf just simply less interesting? I want to compartmentalize this. Week to week, you can make that argument to me because you can say that it's so split that how do I have enough energy as a fan? I don't want to look. I want you to watch me, like I said, every time I'm broadcasting on PGA Tour Live. But I get the fan perspective that this can be exhausting week to week right now. Do I think overall there's still a lot of interest in golf? 100%. And I think that this has created a situation where big moments, whether they be major championships or other Ryder Cups or other specific events, will be magnetized even more. That's where, when people talk about the boxing analogy, is golf becoming boxing? That's what you don't want either, where only certain weeks matter. You don't want that. In the best case, golf is relevant for more than just a few weeks a year. But I do think when you're talking overall, we do have to acknowledge there's that interest. I like what I saw out there. There was a take that, we're at the point in golf where news is being broken by the Wall Street Journal in the US and not by, say, a Golf Digest, golf.com, Golf Week, or Breaking News Golf reporter. And I think that's fascinating because imagine an NBA player signing, say, the biggest contract in NBA history, and it's broken by the Wall Street Journal and not Woj or Shams. It wouldn't happen. And I think that is kind of giving you the gist of this being about business more than this being about the actual golf itself. And that's no good for any of the fans. I mentioned that, that Jared Hitchcock tweet that I got. Thank you for that. Just asking, why do people care? It's why I love professional golf. I love to see the competition. I love to see the competition in a sport that I try to play, can't necessarily play as well as these guys, but can relate to, that one-on-one sort of energy coming down the stretch. I'm not even going to say that it's just because of the meritocracy, because if you wanted to tell me that these guys, when all is said and done and there's a compromise, that these guys will make a base amount, great. I think we talk about this in basically every other sport. They do make a certain amount. I understand that. I think to compare the base that LIV Golf is paying some of these players to reality would be foolish and narrow-minded, but to understand that down the road, should guys on the PGA Tour be getting paid a base 100%, 100%. I think part of that comes with your FedEx Cup finish. You can look at that as well. But I think that you can explore that going forward. And that will be perhaps part of the eventual framework agreement. When the framework agreement becomes an actual agreement, that will be part of it probably. But right now, I got to say the game is in a tough place. It's split right now. I like that I put a ton of notes here, and I ended up getting to them before I even ended up scrolling down on my page. So at least I hope I'm showing that passion to all of you. I do want to talk about, in terms of growing the game, I mentioned Jon Rahm. I don't want to. I don't want to. If Jon Rahm, like I had mentioned that Todd Lewis quote, and actually I'll go to Josh Siegel asking, do you think Jon Rahm took the money knowing that a merger is realistically to be finalized by the end of the year, or he truly believes that LIV is the answer? I go back to that Todd Lewis quote and say he's hedging, it appears, and that's good for, that could be good or it could be very bad for him. I don't know. But that's, I think the reports are that is part of why he did this. And maybe in his heart of hearts, in his mind, he is the guy that is going to create peace in all of this by doing this deal and bringing everyone to the table. I don't think it's the way that I would go about it. I don't think that I could have done the interview that Jon Rahm did, knowing how naturally passionate I am about the PGA Tour and the sanctity of professional golf and the game that I love. I couldn't necessarily do what he did, go on and speak the way that he did. But if that is his end goal and he gets to that point, great. Alex Monaco, great. My guy at MSG Networks, great sports gambling, sports betting host, said, will this speed up a potential merger? And are there any positives to take away from him completely going back on his word? I think that's what I'm alluding to is you could say if one day we find out that Jon Rahm, everything that he did led to an expedited merger and we all saying kumbaya and the golf world is great, then sure, you can say that. But for right now, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like he is a piece in all of this and he took his money and you can't fault him for that. But in terms of the sanctity of the sport and protecting a lot of the traditions and him pledging his fealty, it's hard to find a positive in that right now. Now, you can tell me, like I said, this podcast might be moot by the time I'm done. It might be moot by the weekend. I'm trying to get this up on Friday afternoon. But as of right now, we're talking on December 8th. We have 23 days left before the potential merger or the deadline for the merger. This is where things stand. In terms of that potential merger, if you tell me, Alex or Josh or anyone that asks that we're going to have this deal done by December 31st and Brooks Koepka and Rory McIlroy are going to be in the final group at the Players Championship in March, I would say sign me up. But I do want to hear what some of those details are, because there are reasons why the deal is not reached right now, why there was a framework agreement and the deal has not been reached. And a lot of that has to do with a few things. Compensation, obviously, for players on both sides. The guys that stayed on the PGA Tour, how will they be compensated? There was a report that as part of the negotiations, there would be $1 billion cycled around the players who have stayed on the PGA Tour. In terms of the actual format of the PGA Tour, what happens are we talking signature events? That if you don't know what signature events are, they are events that have been added that have not been, certain events have been designated signature events for the second straight year that have elevated purses in this year in particular to be able to qualify for those events, which for the most part are no cut, not all of them. You need to have finished in the top 50 last year or hit certain benchmarks, whether that be top 30 in the official world golf rankings, have been playing well to within certain windows before these upcoming events. There are sponsors exemptions. There's a few other things. Will those be part of a merger of a future tour? Will there be teams? There's been a lot of talk. Bob Golf Ball, whatever his name is in my mentions, talking about Formula One. Is that a future in golf that is made, the team aspect is made a part of all of this? Perhaps. We'll see. Maybe there's a way to make it work. I think there's been a lot of talk about making it more legitimate than manipulative, in terms of we don't know how guys ended up on what team. We don't know why the logos are the way that they are on the LIV side. Maybe there's something, maybe there's more revenue to be made if those teams are sold. We know that PGA Tour players would potentially get equity in this new PGA Tour Enterprises. I'd imagine that includes players that come back to the PGA Tour. But again, that all needs to be sorted out. There's a lot of stuff on the sponsors and the business side that is way above my pay grade that I don't want to get into necessarily. But I think we know that if the PIF is coming to the table for this, they're going to want some of their sponsors involved with the PGA Tour. The PGA Tour obviously wants to protect some of their longtime sponsors and create a situation where the PGA Tour or PGA Tour Enterprises, or whatever this whatever the company is called, is making revenue, and also the players are making money as well. and also maybe the media involved, but we'll save that for another day. All in all, that's a lot of what I'm talking about. I want to, I guess, finish on one particular point, because I mentioned my brother and I talking about how great golf was in 2021. And before all of this, and part of why this happened was because golf was was improving so much and becoming such a high level spectator sport beyond the Tiger Woods era. And the reason, after everything that I said, the reason I still believe in all of this, and the reason that I'm not going to be a pessimist, that I'm going to be an optimist, is that if we can reach a point where this all comes together and the best players are playing in the best places again, on the best venues, with the best courses, with the best coverage, there is an opportunity here for this all to finish with an incredibly celebrated outcome and professional golf tour, professional golf ecosystem to present to the world, and perhaps remedy some things that needed to be changed up in the modern era of the game, and create a situation that fans can love what they're watching. The fan experience in person can be great. The fan experience on TV can be great. We know that sports betting is going to be a big part, and fantasy is going to be a big part of golf moving forward. If all of that can come together, spectacular. I'm happy that I'm going to get to at least be a part of some sliver of golf this year as part of PGA Tour Live. And, I started this podcast to be able to talk about a lot of things. Really, I started to interview a lot of the interesting characters in golf. But today, I felt like this was important to have this emergency podcast to be able to share both inform a lot of people on what is going on, and also be able to express just my take and outlook on everything going on, because I want the best for the sport. And I know there were some things that I probably left out, but I think all in all, I'm rooting for golf. I still believe in golf. I'm still going to play my best part to be someone that tries to move the sport forward. I'll say it, tries to grow the game, tries to connect the sport to so many new fans, and just tries to, like I said, celebrate and get excited and present this, what should be an incredible product, in the best way possible. So stick with me everywhere. I appreciate you listening to this point. I know I didn't want to ever release a podcast on a Friday night, but this is a different situation out here. So appreciate you watching or listening to this emergency podcast. Remember to follow and subscribe to Eyes on Golf. I'm Jeff Eisenband. See you next time, perhaps not in an emergency podcast setting.